Chapter 12. Australia, Down Under. How grateful we were to Australia for granting us a visa so we could make a home there. We knew the depth of Australia's help and will never forget its kindness. Our forefathers lived in Iran for nearly 3,000 years. A group of Saudi Arabian Muslims invaded our country, strengthened the roots, and killed or forced millions of Iranians to leave their motherland in the past 1,400 years. We were treated as strangers in our homeland. But Australia opened her arms wide and spent thousands of her taxpayers' money to reserve our dignity and human rights. We were amazed at the caring heart of this nation, leading us to always care for this country and even lay our life for her if necessary. God took us to a country beautiful by nature and people. Upon our arrival in Sydney International Airport, we saw Margaret, our sponsor, with many of her friends waiting to convey a warm welcome for us on behalf of Jesus and Australia. We were so emotional and honored by such a friendly and caring moment. I was overwhelmed by excitement and unconsciously greeted all men in a Middle Eastern way, kissing them on their cheeks. They were so gracious and ignoring my mistakes, but I knew that we needed to learn and respect their culture. We were not the only ones to shock them culturally. They shocked us. They wore a very casual dress for this welcoming moment, including their pastor. He wore shorts and had an earring. Our imagination said that a pastor had to dress himself formal or semi-formal. An Iranian pastor was with them, and contrary to everyone else at the airport, he wore a suit and a tie. He did that to make us more comfortable. Eventually, we learned to wear casual clothes and enjoy Australian hot weather. Keith and Hilda, an older couple in their 70s, hosted us for 2 weeks in Barora, a suburb in the north of Sydney. We stayed there until we could finish the settlement paperwork with the relevant government offices and rent a house. My wife and daughters knew no English, surviving conversations with what little English I knew. Sometimes Keith would draw or show pictures to us in order to make his words understandable. After 2 weeks, Margaret found a rental house closer to her own house, and we rented it. Our first day and night in the house were a bit horrifying. While I was washing the dishes in the kitchen in the middle of the day, I saw a snake moving on a plant in the front yard. The whole family fell into panic until Keith hurried to our help. He saw the snake and said, "Oh, it's harmless." "Harmless? What is harmless?" I asked him. He repeated the word a few times, but I was still unable to understand. He asked for a pen and paper. I was able to understand him when he wrote the word on the paper, harmless. As I saw the letter R in the word, I started to say, "Oh, harmless, harmless," emphasizing the letter R. Yeah, I understand it now. The following night, we took our daughters each to their own designated bed in the house. We were happy and excited they could have their own bed and room. My wife and I were also ready for a peaceful night and rest after a long day. We once again praise God for His abundant grace and mercy to our family for sheltering us in Australia. As we were ready to go to bed, we saw a giant spider moving on the window in our room between the glass and fly screen. This was scarier than our daytime experience with the snake since it was nighttime. I jumped to the window to make sure that there was not a hole any place on the window for the spider to have access into the room. With fear, we planned to kill it before it could kill us. The only solution was for me to go out and kill it from behind the fly screen from outside. My wife said, "What if it sprayed poison on you from a distance? We never know. Maybe some of them are on the pathway or on the plants around." I listened to my wife and gave up going out. We looked at each other and didn't know what else we could do. It was around 11 p.m. After 10 p.m., you do not call people normally. We had no choice but to call Keith again and wake him up for help. Keith came and saw the spider and repeated the same word, harmless, which he had used for the snake. Not only was this scary spider harmless, but also good for eating mosquitoes and insects, said Keith. The day after, he brought a book and showed us many pictures explaining which creatures in Australia were harmless and which ones were harmful. One day, Bill and his wife, a couple from Margaret's church who were in our neighborhood, called me and invited the family for tea at 6 p.m. After thanking him, I said that I would call him back after checking with my wife. My wife and I found it strange to be called for tea at 6 p.m. This was also our dinner time. With 3 very young school children, we usually ate our dinner earlier so that the kids could go to bed early to be up early in the morning. Since these were our first days in Australia and did not know the culture, we did not want to lose this friendship opportunity because our family set time for dinner. We wanted to have a chance for building a relationship with our neighbors. We decided to have our dinner earlier than 6 p.m. and go for tea. We did not want to leave our dinner for after because it would become late for our children's bedtime. My wife made a big meal so that it could hold us longer for a late night. After the meal, we walked to Bill's house. We were welcomed so warmly and thanked for accepting their invitation. Bill's wife had to rush to her kitchen as she was cooking something. We saw that they had set 7 plates on the table, and Bill was also setting glasses for drinks. My wife and I started to talk to each other quietly. It seems that they're waiting for some other visitors to come for dinner. I hope they bring the tea for us quicker so that we can leave earlier rather than disturbing their dinner time. Why did they call us for tea if they had called others for dinner? We did not know what to say and kept sitting there quietly, but nervous for any inconvenience we could cause. After a short time, they put all the food on the table and called us to take our seats around the table. I said, "Oh, thank you so much. We had our dinner and have come for tea only." With a perplexing face, Bill came closer and said, "But I invited you for dinner." "I am sorry, Bill. You never mentioned anything about dinner. You just asked us to come for tea," I responded. "Oh, my goodness," Bill said. "I am sorry. We call dinner tea sometimes. If we want to offer a hot drink to someone, we say a cup of tea or coffee. I am so sorry. That's my mistake." We felt so sorry for our precious neighbors to cook a lot of food for us, who had eaten till our stomachs almost burst. Our children were so full, they were unable to touch the food. Only my wife and I could eat a little bit with them. Our older daughter was 11 years old, extroverted by nature, and able to relate herself to the students in school socially. 2 younger ones, 6 and 4 years old, were attached to us parents because of their age and also the new culture and environment. We experienced their tears in the first days of school and sometimes also shared tears with them. After a few days of struggling with a lack of communication with classmates and also the long hours away from the family, our middle daughter came to us with a solution. "Mom, how about we 2 stay at home with you and our older sister learn from her school and teach us at home?" It was heartbreaking for us that we were not able to grant her days of thoughtful and sensitive planning. We would have loved them to grow in their learning with Australians from the beginning to the end so that they could have a memorable life in the future. They were little and had good opportunities to establish themselves in the Australian culture, appreciate it as their own country, and also help us as their parents to understand it well. We were a bit different than our children. We had already established ourselves in the Iranian and Middle Eastern culture. We had a long journey to learn English in the Western culture and find the most appropriate way to be a blessing to Australia. We missed our families in Iran very much as we had not seen them for years. Different things would remind us of our families and bring back memories in Iran, leaving us emotionally tortured. We sought to reduce our homesickness via building connections with Iranians, and in particular with Iranian Christians in Sydney. However, the Iranian culture is a strong family-oriented culture, and we still missed our families. We prayed to God daily, impatiently waiting for the tyranny in Iran to come to an end so that we could go and see our families. We haven't been able to see our families for more than 2 decades. My wife's life became so difficult in the first years of our life in Sydney. She heard of the sudden death of her mother, older sister, and a couple of her uncles. She was shattered emotionally because she could not be there to see her dear ones in the last moment of their lives. One day, she shocked and terrified us by saying that she was no longer able to bear the pains of separation and wanted to go back to Iran to see her family. "What about if the Islamic government takes you to prison, tortures you, and keeps you as a hostage in order to torture the entire family in Iran and Sydney? Wouldn't it be more torturing to you to be kept away from your children and husband?" I and a few other friends said to her through our tears. She started to weep and say, "Am I not human? I just want to see my family. This is killing me gradually." We praise God, who reminded her that if we did not leave our land, we would not have freedom. The sacrifice for freedom came to us with the price of leaving our homeland. God gave her comfort and strength so that she could tolerate the pains and rather invest her life in our country for bringing the hostile walls of Islamic rule in Iran down through the love and sacrifice of Christ. She now rejoices over the salvation of millions of Iranians in Iran and abroad. It will always be difficult for my wife and me since we have our dear ones living in Iran. We always love to see them. We also understand that this world has turned its back on Christ and his followers and will not be able to give them peace. We knew from the beginning that we would lose everything for the sake of Christ. Sometimes we forget and pour tears, but as the Apostle Paul said, nothing can separate us from the love of Christ. Our first 3 years were spent learning the language, culture, and computer skills in Sydney. As a family, we attended an English-speaking church on Sunday mornings and a Persian fellowship in the afternoon. I began receiving invitations from churches to give a testimony of our journey from Islam to Christ. At first, I would take an interpreter to translate my Persian into English, But gradually, my English improved and I was able to speak on my own. In 1994, I enrolled in a Christian Bible college and along with several other Iranian Christians formed an Iranian church in Sydney. While all of us were involved in evangelism, the preaching was done by me and another gentleman who was also a theology student. As the church grew, the pastoral role was given to me. It was not a paid ministry. I accepted the ministry but felt my call from God for evangelism, in which I became fully involved. At the end of 1996, I graduated from the Bible college and needed to find a job to support my family. I wanted to find a Christian church or organization that would support my evangelistic ministry but was unsuccessful, so I set out to look for a job that would bring some income for the family. In 1997, I took a part-time job at a university as a lecturer of cultural values in an international management course. I taught this course until 2004. I also traveled throughout Australia and internationally during school holidays. I spoke about our journey, taught Islamic beliefs, and created awareness of Islam's plan for the world, in particular, the West.